Hi guys, this is Rain here. I'm just working on page 51 of my comic Magnum L today, and I actually had a chance to film this one for the first time in a while. So right off the bat, I'm sorry if it gets a little bit jumpy with the editing at some points. It was really just because I worked on this in one day, but in a few separate sittings, so I kept getting up, and I feel like I forgot to continue to hit record at some points. Um, but just so you know, when I am doing a page like this for recording, I'll usually start with a sketch next to me on paper or something. So I kind of know what I'm getting into beforehand. I'll usually approach these pages a little bit more organizedly so that I don't have to get up and shoot reference and do other things. So I had all of that ready in advance. But just as the way of things is, I still ended up reshooting a lot and second guessing a lot of poses, which you'll actually see, I think, in just a moment. Yeah, right there. Um, that I had a few different thoughts on, and my first attempt I was just not happy with, so I completely deleted the pose. And didn't delete it. I try not to destroy anything. Because I'm super neurotic, I'll just tuck it into a folder named Rejected at the bottom of the page, or at the bottom of the layers. So yeah, this also got rejected pretty quickly because I just wasn't feeling it. Doesn't look like it has impact. Action scenes are something that are really, really new to me, so I'm kind of trying to reframe how I think about um, shooting reference for images. And I always try to shoot my own reference. Um, it just really helps for understanding gestures. Here's another long section of redoing and redoing and redoing. Um, oh, actually, it got cut out, but you can see up in the corner of the page there's two mouths there that were rejected. And I just couldn't bear to delete right away because they looked okay. They just weren't right. Um, so this is a pretty simple page, other than the fact that it is action. No dialogue or anything, so that kind of makes life easy to not have to do any typesetting. Um, but I feel like this is an interesting one to see because of all of the second guessing, and you'll see it as it goes. Just putting things in, taking them out, doing them again, doing them again, doing them again, especially with the Fishman. Um, but I feel like it's so important just to make sure that the feel of things is right first. It's really difficult because I hate just outrightly deleting something, but I find that it's always better for me if something isn't coming out to just delete it or get it out of there and totally redo it. Trying to keep working with the same thing, just like polishing a turd per se, usually has a worse outcome, and then I end up deleting it eventually anyway. So I've been making a big effort to kind of like fight with myself less about that and just go for it. But for those of you that aren't familiar with the comic, but happen to find this, hi, just so you're aware, you'll notice the character's sword up there. Sunny is totally busted, probably to the point of not even looking like a sword. It did happen to get melted a few pages ago, so yeah. Let's see. So this is, I'm sorry, some quick jumping between Betha's face there, and then I think I'll end up jumping some more. But oftentimes when I get into working on a character, I'll kind of switch between every image of them, and you'll definitely see that with coloring. And that's a little bit more out of functionality because I'll just have like one color selected and I'll want to get through it kind of before switching. So, yeah. There's the actual panel lines. Generally, I try to do that a little bit earlier in the process so that I have more of an idea where I'm going, but for pages that I know I'm going to be breaking the panels, which I did a little bit here, it's helpful to add it a little later, because I don't want to just pick like, okay, well his elbow is going to break the panel. Which, in this case it did, but I'll try to give myself a little bit more freedom to see what I want to actually exit the panel. And if I have the lines in advance, I just end up, again, redrawing them a bunch. So yeah. This is also a simple page in terms of background. I really like working in interior spaces and working on all the details of a space, and that's been one of the tough things about action scenes, is that you really can't put all that detail behind your characters because, you know, it's just not the focus. So I've kind of been at war with myself lately over whether or not it's more important to, you know, spend a lot of time making sure that the background's in there and correct and at the right angle, even though it's like a weird fighting angle, or if it's more important to just really focus on the action itself, because that's what's happening narratively in the background isn't necessarily relevant. So my solution to that in a lot of cases recently has been to do these kind of like swoopy, washy watercolor backgrounds, often using spatter brushes and things like that to try to keep some energy and interest to it, even though there's not actually a backdrop. But I hope it works. I don't know. The only other really solutions I've thought about are like, well, I could just fill it up with action lines, but that would be a little bit too manga-y feeling to me, I think. So this is the solution that I have for now. Maybe eventually I'll come up with something better than swoop backgrounds, which you'll see a bunch in a bit. Oh, and something people ask me a lot that's kind of relevant to the watercolor wash backgrounds is whether or not I do work traditionally or digitally. And obviously, as you can see, this is digital. I use Kyle Webster's watercolor brushes. They're insanely realistic for brushes like this. They've fooled so many people. And like, I'm not trying to fool people into thinking it's traditional by any means. I definitely, digitally is how I work. But just inadvertently, they're convincing enough that they come off as being actual traditional watercolor brushes. So that's pretty cool. I highly recommend them, and I highly recommend supporting him if anybody's looking for good brushes. They're not very expensive considering they're like, I think the watercolor pack was like $7 or something, and he is an illustrator and independently sells them himself, so that's super cool. I pretty much stick to almost exclusively one brush for working on the characters. It's watercolor brush. It's called Diluted 90 if anybody cares. The only exception I make is for metal. I'll use a brush that's named Brutus. But to handle the watercolors, I kind of try to work all on one layer each color, which I know a lot of people who do kind of more painterly digital work will still work on all one layer to kind of mimic the traditional feel again. But for me, my traditional art background is in printmaking, so I'm really into separating all the colors really, really meticulously, and then kind of like picking and choosing where I want them to blend and combined. Trying to kind of move into a more painterly way of thinking, but it's slow going for a printmaker. So yeah. And then these big washes, I find, this is what I was talking about with that like swoop background that are starting to be in now. They're really I like how they look, I guess, but they're kind of a pain. I don't know if anybody else has this problem of it lags like crazy. So you can see my brush actually hanging out to the side of the page while it fills in, and this is sped way up. I will wait for like 5 minutes while it just fills in after I've already painted it. So I don't know. I don't know if that's like a common Photoshop issue, but it's something I've had forever and just kind of coped with. Yeah, now we're getting to some blood adding. Blood's so tough because I feel like it looks like such a cool, interesting visual element, and I love it for the shock of color, but it's also hard not to be totally copious about it because it's like you get so into like, oh, red, oh, the page is bright, and then it's suddenly like, oh, it's a lot of blood. But yeah, so that's the page. Thanks for tuning in, and hope you guys really enjoy the comic and check it out. Thanks!